Mr. President.
The senator from Maine.
Mr. President, what's the status of the session at this point? Are we in a quorum call?
We are not in a quorum call.
And I ask unanimous consent to address the Senate as if in morning business for approximately 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, one of the peculiar aspects of my service in this body is that I was sworn in as a United States Senator 40 years to the day from the day I entered Senate service as a staff member in January of 1973. Consequently, it's given me an interesting perspective about the operation of the Senate compared then and now. And I'm sure that some part of my memory of working here in the early 1970s and mid-1970s is colored by the rosy view of nostalgia, looking back at one's youth and one's past. But even correcting for that bit of nostalgia, it's my observation that in those days we spent about 80% of our time governing and about 20% of our time on politics. And there were plenty of politics. This was during the Watergate period. There was a Democratic Senate and a Republican president. President Nixon resigned during the period that I was here. So it wasn't as if politics weren't part of our life, but the work of the government continued, and the governing, which was done by this body and the House of Representatives, continued even in an era of very intense politics in our nation's history. A friend asked me the other day, what's the difference between then and now? And I said, well, in those days, my recollection is it was about 80% governing and 20% politics. Today, it's reversed. It's 80% politics and 20% governing, and I want to talk a bit about governing. Probably our most fundamental responsibility after national security is a little matter of the federal budget. It's something that we have to do every year. It's something that's in the Constitution. It's one of our most basic responsibilities. And yet here we are, 10 legislative days away from the end of the fiscal year, with no budget, no appropriations bills that have been passed in both houses, no conference committees, and as far as I can tell, no negotiations at the highest level in order to resolve what could be an impending shutdown of the United States government. In addition, we have the sequester facing us, which was designed, Mr. President, to be stupid. It was designed to be so unacceptable to both sides of the political aisle that a solution would surely be found. I remember being asked about it when I was running for this office in 2012. People said, well, what do you think of this sequester that may happen next year? I said, it will never happen because it's so unacceptable both on the defense side and on the domestic side. Surely members of Congress will come together and find a compromise solution. That happened with the Murray-Ryan arrangement 2 years ago. But here we are, again, facing a potential shutdown, and I don't have to enumerate the problems that creates, problems of national security, problems of effect on the overall economy, problems of confidence and trust in the government itself. So here we are, and we're not governing when it comes to a budget. The highway fund is an even worse embarrassment. We have patched the highway fund temporarily 34 times, most recently this summer. That expires in October. I have not heard a great deal of discussion about what the resolution of the highway fund is going to be, and I'll make a bold prediction. Come October, there's going to be somebody come to this floor and say, we're close to a solution. All we need is 2 more months. So let's extend it to January. And then we'll solve the highway problem once and for all. That doesn't pass the straight face test, Mr. President. Here we are, so we've got the budget in 10 days, the highway fund in October. We've got the tax extenders, which last year we passed, and they only affected 2 weeks of the year. And yet we expect American businesses to make plans and investments and look ahead, and they don't know what the tax code situation is going to be until the last 2 weeks of the year, and they've gotten to the point where they expect that, well, okay, it looks like they're going to take care of it. But that's not governing. And there's a cost to that. There's a cost to our economy. I've been in business, and I know that one of the most important things to a business is certainty. Knowing what the rules are, knowing what the tax code is, knowing what the regulations are going to be. Business people can deal with regulations or tax policy. The very difficult thing, however, is uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty, you have a lack of confidence. And when you have a lack of confidence, you have a lack of investment. And when you have a lack of investment, you have a lack of jobs. I don't have the econometric analysis, but in my view, the uncertainty, the instability, the unpredictability of this body and of this institution has significantly put a damper on economic growth in this country. I don't know whether it's half a point of GDP, a full point, or a quarter point, but it's a lot, because people don't feel that they can have confidence in what the rules of the game are going to be. And to pass tax extenders for 2015 in the last 2 weeks of 2015 is just, as I say, it's embarrassing. Or I think I said it was the highway fund was embarrassing. They're both embarrassing. And then we've got the Export-Import Bank, whose charter expired at the end of June. This is one that I really don't understand. Here's a government agency that's 70 or 80 years old, provides support from businesses across the country, including in my state of Maine, some very small businesses, and it fills a market niche that the private sector is not filling. It returns money to the Treasury, and it helps to create jobs in the United States. What's not to like? And yet, for reasons that I can't discern, it seems to be something about ideology, because you don't want to have, heaven forbid, there should be a government agency that works. So we better put it out of business. It's not making any more loans. And yesterday, General Electric, one of our most important national companies, announced the elimination of 500 jobs, including 84 jobs in Bangor, Maine, because of the lack of the support provided by the Export-Import Bank, which, by the way, every other industrialized nation in the world provides some level of support and encouragement for exports, except us, as of June 30th. A staff member for the committee in the other body, which handles the Financial Services Committee that handles this, their comment was about the GE layoffs. Well, 500 jobs is a drop in the bucket for GE. 84 jobs is not a drop in the bucket for Bangor, Maine. Those are families. Those are real people. It makes a difference in our community, and it's ridiculous. If there was some policy reason for it, if there was some controversy, I could understand it. But to do it just because we don't like the idea of this agency, even though it's effective in its mission and returns money to the Treasury, just doesn't make any sense. So the budget, we're not doing. The highway fund, we're not doing. The tax extenders, we're not doing. The Export-Import Bank, we're not doing. What are we doing? We're spending another week on the issue of Iran, which we thoroughly debated and voted on last week. And I understand we may spend another 2 or 3 days on it next week for a series of amendments that can appear to me to be strictly designed to embarrass some members of this body and to create fodder for 30-second ads a year from now. That's not governing, Mr. President. That's pure, unadulterated politics. And it's not dealing with the problems of this nation. We debated the Iran issue thoroughly. I have never worked so hard on a single issue in my life. We all had the entire recess to work on it, to think about it, to talk to people, to read the agreement. Before the recess, there were innumerable hearings and briefings and classified briefings. We've now had 2 identical votes. 2 identical votes. Yesterday, one of my colleagues said, I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day. We're voting again on exactly the same issue. Now I understand we're going to have more votes. Every member, I have never known an issue where every single member of this body has expressed themselves on one side or the other. There is no question where anybody stands. Everybody has expressed themselves. Everybody has announced their position. 100 senators have announced their position. And I have to say a bit about 60 votes. To argue that this issue of such momentous import should not require 60 votes when virtually everything else we've done around here since I've been here for the last 2.5 years has required 60 votes is just preposterous. I remember standing right here a year ago, hearing one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talking about some obscure amendment to some bill and said, this amendment should be subjected to the normal 60-vote requirement. And I said, normal? What isn't normal? Well, it has become normal. It was the rule for the last 2 years. Now suddenly, it was a bulwark of democracy. I remember talking about how should we modify the filibuster rule. No, we can't do that. The 60 vote is that's a bulwark of democracy. That protects the minority. That's built into the essence. That's what the Senate is all about. Now all of a sudden, it's not so important. And people say, well, this was a procedural vote. You had a filibuster. How dare you filibuster? Let me say unequivocally, the proponents of the Iran agreement are prepared to have an up or down vote on that agreement this afternoon, as long as a 60-vote majority is part of the agreement about the vote. The only reason there was a 60 vote on a filibuster motion, on a cloture motion, was that the majority would not put that issue on the table, up or down vote, with a 60-vote margin. And yet, everybody knew when this bill passed, the Corker bill passed, that it was going to require 60 votes. Senator Corker's on record on the floor talking about, of course, it's going to require 60 votes. And even the famous letter to the Ayatollah, in the second paragraph, said, of course, agreements like this are going to be subject to a 3/5 majority. Everybody knew this was going to be 60 votes. And to express shock now reminds me of the end of Casablanca, where the inspector says, I'm shocked to see gambling here. I'm shocked that there should be a 60-vote requirement. Of course there's going to be a 60-vote requirement, as there has been for every other substantive issue and a lot of not-so-substantive issues for the last 2.5 years. Now we're going to start to vote apparently on other issues not in the Iran agreement. Bring home the hostages, recognize Israel. Those are desirable ends. I support them entirely. But that wasn't what this negotiation was all about. This negotiation was to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon now. It was to roll back their nuclear program. That's what the negotiation was. It wasn't about the hostages. It wasn't about Israel. It wasn't about Iran's malign activities in the region. One of my colleagues on the floor a few minutes ago said Iran is a malign state, is a rogue state. They're going to get money from the sanctions relief. Yes, they are. But the only thing worse than a rogue state with money from the sanctions relief is a rogue state with money as the sanctions erode with nuclear weapons. And that's what this is all about. When President Kennedy was negotiating with the Soviet Union to get the missiles out of Cuba, at the end of the negotiation, he didn't say, by the way, Castro has to go, or you, Soviet Union, have to forswear your enmity to the West. And by the way, we've heard Iran say death to America. The Soviet leadership said, we will bury you. Same deal, same level of threat. But Kennedy was focused on getting those missiles out. That was the threat. Just as today the threat is to keep nuclear arms out of the hands of Iran, which we all agree is what we need to do. We've debated Iran. We've taken 2 identical votes. The outcome are the same. I predict the outcome will continue to be the same. And yet, every minute we now spend on an issue that has been resolved is a minute that we don't spend on issues that need resolution. The budget, the highway fund, the debt limit, the Export-Import Bank, the tax extenders. That's governing, Mr. President. And that's what this body should be doing. I hope my colleagues at some point in the very near future will decide that it's time to attend to those issues, and if we disagree with a policy decision that's been made, so be it. But we need to move forward and not continue to politicize an issue which, in my view, should not have been politicized in the first place. These are weighty and important issues. The Iran decision was the hardest that I've ever had to make, but I've made it. We voted. It's done. We need to move forward, and we need to move forward to meet the urgent needs of the people of this country. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.